Take a Fortune 10 company and decide to move the majority of their applications to the public cloud. Sounds impossible, right? But that's exactly what GE is doing, and today we're talking with the executive leading this extraordinary transformation. I'm Charles Araujo, and this is the TransformIT Show, presented by the Intel IT Center. I recently sat down with Lance Weaver, CTO of Cloud Architecture at GE, to talk about their ambitious program. Within their efforts are some lessons about what it takes to really transform a large organization. I'm here with Lance Weaver, CTO for Cloud Architecture with GE. Lance, welcome to the TransformIT Show.
Thank you, Charles.
Lance, you are a young executive on the rise in a progressive but also a very large organization, and you are leading a project to move a large number of your applications into the public cloud, a feat that many might consider near impossible. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that project just to set some context, but what I'm really interested in is how you are moving an organization as large as yours quickly like this into this future.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the background here is, GE, obviously a large company, around $150 billion a year, and realistically in multiple market segments. And that introduces some challenges as well as opportunities. We talk about GE scale across that, but also we have various industry speeds and regulatory issues as well. But from the project, we want to really move on the enterprise side a very high percentage of our applications into the cloud, and specifically into the public cloud. And that really is the main emphasis there is around speed and agility. We really think that we'll get innovation cycle time reduction out of it, and realistically reduce some of the barriers to that cycle time. So, in some cases you have people who have an idea, want to go test it out, and it takes so long and it's so difficult to actually get systems up and available that they just simply don't do it. And so we see the cloud really being the facilitator for that.
There's obviously a lot of reason for moving to the cloud, and yet we see a ton of resistance in organizations where there's just this kind of entrenchment. And again, what I find fascinating is, the idea of a $150 billion company is just staggering to me. I mean, it's just a huge organization. How are you actually creating the kind of organizational change that's required to make this kind of really disruptive move?
Yeah, we are really remaking, who we are internally and how we go. And there's I think an advantage from a GE perspective in the fact that we adapt and embrace change. So organizationally, that makes it a bit easier, but what we see is realistically changing the culture, right? How we approach our work, how we approach the effort, and then really what our job and mission is, right, as an organization, and that's to make our businesses more competitive, right? And hopefully cost less, right? But realistically, we're really about speed and agility with those business units. So moving the organization in that direction is we really spent some time at our application level looking at it from a risk standpoint, right? So stratifying those applications based on risk, and then working with the various cloud providers on addressing those issues, right, in the industry. And we definitely feel like we're on the front edge of what a lot of people where they'll want to be. And so from that perspective, we looked at things like hybrid cloud, but we consider hybrid cloud more of an interim step, right? We really want to be out there. We think we'll be out there, and given the size and scale of GE, doing something like that is, it's fine, but it's not going. It'll take us longer. It's trying to turn a super tanker, right? So what we want to do is get to that end solution faster, and then help develop the models and methods with the providers as we go.
So if I can drill down a little bit on this, though, because I think there's a mindset question here. You and I were at a meeting in New York a few months back, and without going into the details of that specific meeting, what was fascinating about it is there were a lot of representatives from very large companies around the room who, we'll just say, were very resistive to this idea, right? No, the public cloud isn't ready for this. There's all these challenges. And what struck me most, in fact, the reason we are sitting here, is that here you were with probably the largest company in the room, or certainly one of the largest, and yet you're going, no, we can figure this out. We can make this happen. How do you cultivate that kind of mindset, not only within yourself personally, but within your teams?
You're probably right there. It is a change, and I guess partly for us, right? It was really going through, where we were, right? Organizationally. So we were running some internal cloud capability, but also, our traditional, legacy systems. And as you can imagine, we have, probably the full range of everything that's been produced in IT over the years. So what we really were doing was saying, hey, how do we take those leaps and make ourselves better, and then ultimately get to that solution where we want to be. And I guess realistically, we say, how do we do that, right? And we look at it more as we must do this. We need to do this in order to still maintain that competitive advantage of having size and scale, but being fast and nimble for our business units globally, right? And we go into many markets across the globe, but it's really, we're in the emerging spaces, right? So, we do energy, for instance, right? So you've got gas turbines and oil and gas, et cetera. Africa is a, huge market for us, up and coming, and obviously from an IT standpoint, the reach into that space is very difficult. So solving those problems for ourselves is really where we say, wow, this is the solution. We can make this happen.
So as you look back on your career personally, are there any key learnings or key takeaways, maybe a specific experience or two that kind of sets you up to be able to lead this kind of, to me, it's almost a question of the confidence to lead this kind of change. I think there's a lot of people who would be in your position who would sit there and say, well, this is a really big company, really entrenched in its ways. I'm just, best I can do is create this little incremental change. And here you're leading this, this really fundamental shift. Are there any things that you can look back at your career, your experiences that maybe you feel set you up for this?
I think definitely from a broad experience level. I had a pretty broad technical background when I joined GE, but GE really focuses on developing leaders, right? They've got a long heritage of that, and with that was the movement into multiple roles, and in some cases I had a really good set of mentors and leaders that I worked for, and really more of a push. You need to go into areas that you're not comfortable with, right, and learn how to do that, learn how to lead teams of people, and then also learn the spaces. And so with that view, right, that's where I gathered a lot of background. So I spent time as a CISO, right, on the security side, in operations, in application architecture, in infrastructure, and ultimately as the CTO for one of our divisions. And I think that background has given me, the foundation to really look at a challenge like this, right, and apply that background and experience to it, and then the willingness to go after and the courage to seek that kind of change.
So I think clearly I'm a huge fan of GE and the management methods to build, I teasingly say it's the leadership factory. If you look at the number of CEOs that are leading other organizations that have come out of GE, right? So I think that's obviously something going for you. But for those people that maybe don't work at a GE, what might they do to replicate some of that if they don't have the entire corporate culture driven that way? Are there some things that maybe you would suggest that they could do to kind of get that same sense?
Yeah, I would say one of those things is continual challenging, right, of where you are, right, what you're about, and getting outside of that comfort zone and really trying to go after new spaces. That and realistically, company culture is what you make it, right? So that change, you need to have influence internally, but realistically, that culture is not something that you put down on a chart of paper and look at it and pull, dust it off and pull it off the shelf. It's really about what the people want within that organization and really buying into a mission and a strategy. So I think realistically anybody within large organizations or small can go affect those changes. They just have to want to.
So let's shift gears a little bit. A few years back, you were instrumental in helping lead a project to actually build a lead data center, a very large lead certified data center there in Louisville. And what I found interesting when I actually went as part of my research and read some of the news articles about it. And what was fascinating about it was two things. The first is that in many ways it was counter to, even because this was only a few years ago, to the outsourcing trend that has been really going on. And certainly seems to run counter to the project that you're now working on. And so I'm curious, I mean, leaving the kind of technology aside for a second, I'm curious about the mindset, the decision-making process of how you approached these situations that led you to two very different decisions.
Yeah, realistically, we kind of walk through it. Fundamentally, they're not that different in the goals. And so when we started the process around that lead data center, it was roughly 2008. So timing comes into play here. But we were after a revamp or remake of our business units, right, on how we did IT, and we really wanted to focus on how do we drive more speed and innovation inside of the company. And if we roll kind of the clock back in 2008, it was all around high density and virtualized instances. So that was really the time we spent going after that from the data center perspective. The cloud was really an inkling at that time, right? It didn't really exist, and certainly wouldn't have been capable of handling enterprises at our scale. But based on that speed and effort, that's where that's what we wanted, right, for the company. If you fast forward to now and you look at the cloud side, it's really around the same concept, right? Speed, innovation. In this case, it gets done in a different manner, right? And so we're utilizing services that allow that self-service capability. And from the outsourcing standpoint, the cloud is really also an insourcing play, right? And that's when it comes to things like DevOps, right? How you want to operate. We're looking at the same kind of thing, right? As our applications become more mature in that space, how do we go faster? And that happens when we start to look at those smaller self-service DevOps teams, and we see a future of insourcing that app development back into the organization to do that. So they seem very different, but reality, the goals and whatnot were the same.
I think that's the real point, if I can give it back to you, was that it's focused on the value that you're trying to drive for the organization. And so I had kind of two big takeaways. The first was that you were focused on the value, not on the technology, which I think is key. And so I'm going to have a question about that. But then the second one is this willingness to not be tied to that decision, which I think is the other problem that people, I mean, obviously this was a long-term investment. I'm sure the data center's still running, but I'm just saying from a mindset standpoint. So I guess my twofold question is this. How do you keep yourself focused on that value equation, and how do you also keep yourself balanced so that you aren't like committed, well, no, we build data centers, right? I mean, being willing to challenge your own decisions as time goes on. How do you kind of balance those two together?
Yeah, you're right. I guess what I'd say is that you need to be focused on where you want to go, right? And that how you're solving that problem. But there's also a reassessment, right? Did the facts change? Did the situation change? And is there a better way? Is there another model? Is it complementary? Is it the replacement for, right? And I think the willingness to adapt and reassess. If you look at a lot of the startup successes, that are out there, they knew what they wanted. They knew they had a problem they were solving, where they were going. But in a lot of cases, they adapted, right? And they saw new opportunities arise, et cetera. I don't think it's really much different inside of a large organization. You have to reassess and readapt when you need to make a turn.
So, and I know GE's got a great culture, but it's still a really big organization. And not that I'm asking you to put any warts on display here, but I mean, I think that's just the reality. Anytime we get large numbers of people together, you get elements of dysfunction, you get elements of resistance and entrenchment. How you know, what I'm always interested in is I say all the same things or a lot of the same things, right? And it sounds easy. And so what I try to get to is the actual practical application. How do you do that? How do you kind of create that mindset within yourself, within your teams, to be willing to do that?
Well, I think you have to, on the front end, be willing to communicate to the organization, right, that you are there for them. Because a lot of times these major changes require, risk taking, and especially in large companies like that, you can get entrenched in a way of doing things, and not wanting to step out and do that. So as we've gone down these changes for my teams, right, I've literally done the all employee meetings and stood in front of them and said, hey, I'm going to be there. I'm going to take, when we have bumps in the road, we're going to get through it, and I'll be there to do it. And of course, the first time that happens, right, everybody wants to see what the reaction is, and if that's handled appropriately, right, and you do it well, then you get a lot of buy-in from the organization, right, and people start to say, hey, we can really do this, right? I'll take a chance that I wouldn't have done before. And those chances, right, are really where that innovation story comes from. So, and I often say, right, that realistically the speed bumps that are there, right, are just bigger depending upon how close you are to it, right? And that's, it's either a hill or a mountain, right? So I think the organization and the teams, right, the culture of the people will buy in if they see, that in fact you back it up and that you do it.
Are there any specific stories you can share that might demonstrate that?
Oh, sure. So when I was the CTO for the appliance and lighting divisions of GE, and we had started down the path of really trying to fully virtualize everything inside of our organization. And with that, it was like literally trying to do that with ERPs as well. And so at that time, that was it was definitely something that people weren't doing yet. But we said, hey, we can get a whole lot more advantage for the organization by going down this path. And so, as we were going through that, we figured out ways to convert and virtualize. Well, at one point, literally, as we got through it, we dropped the entire center out from underneath it at the storage layer, and that was one of those really crucial moments, right? Of obviously we solved it and recovered, et cetera, right? But that was really a crucial moment for the team because it was hugely impactful to the organization, but well worth it because of the ability that we got to go faster, right? And take the risks. And so out of that, when we went through it and I stood in place and said, hey, this happens, et cetera, we're going to get better at it. The trade-off was worth it at the leadership level, and for the organization, they saw that in fact they can take chances, they could go faster, and the world didn't end.
So let's get down to brass tacks a little bit. So in that situation, this kind of major event, were you afraid at that point? Were you, how did you personally respond to that?
Yeah, for me, I wasn't afraid per se, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you're trying to do the right things for the company, and I guess my view on it is that most of the time people will get that, leadership, individual employees, et cetera, they will get it if you're straightforward and honest about it, right? And you are willing to walk through that and say, yeah, we made mistakes, and that's literally in that case what I said, say, hey, we made a mistake, right? And it wasn't a good one.
But I think there's a lot of people that would be very afraid. In fact, I think you see this play out, that they're so afraid, in fact, they try to cover it up. They try to pass it off on somebody else. So it's like, oh yeah, my team, they screwed up, I'm going to go fire those. So what do you think the difference is between that and how you approached it?
Well, I think trying to cover it up, right, or cast blame elsewhere would be probably the worst case, because at the point that came out, then you've lost all credibility, right? So your ability to influence and make change in the organization is gone. So I don't think that would be the right way to go at all, right? And if anybody is really kind of thinking through that, right, and goes that direction, then
I guess what
there's
I'm
no
asking is,
future
how
there.
do you get the confidence to stand there? I mean, I'm sure some of it's just personal who you are, but where does that confidence come from to stand? Because I think it's, I mean, at least in my experience, and we often don't talk about this, but when I work with a lot of organizations and leaders, I mean, I think we see this all the time. We see that people aren't willing to own up to it. They aren't willing to stand up and take the stand. I mean, what did you say? You stood in place. I think it's a very interesting phrase, right? That you kind of held your ground even when all this stuff was happening. And I think, quite frankly, while we may not talk about it, we see that a lot in corporate America and corporate organizations around the world. What do you think the difference is?
I guess probably a healthy culture, right? The willingness to see and understand that, right? And credibility, right? So obviously, if you had that kind of incident happen, every week, then it's not going to work, right? But when you've built up, all the benefits of the other side, right, and gotten a seat at the table, so to speak, and then when you do have those kinds of incidents that you do stand up for it and take the actions necessary to correct it, et cetera, I think people will really they'll agree with it.
We'll respond to that.
Yeah.
So as we wrap this up, you've been very successful in leading change in large organizations. I know we also talked about some of your interactions with some of your key partners like Amazon, and have also been successful in kind of shaping that and moving that as well. As you look back at your career and your experiences, what is the one piece of advice that you would offer up to an up-and-coming digital leader, the leader of the future, to emulate some of that, to be able to have the same kind of impact that you've had in your career?
I guess my advice would be to always know the problem you're trying to solve, right? Be very clear on that. Go after the solution, right, that you believe will get you there, right? Really trying to, take a big swing, right, and move forward. And be very clear on that pathing with everyone you talk to, your team and your peers and your leadership. And stay true to the problem. And even as you run into roadblocks, people want to potentially derail, the mission, et cetera. If you are really very clear on the problem and you're solving it, that's a very strong stance. And that will see you through, in my opinion, will see you through if you stay true to it.
Thank you very much for being on the TransformIT show, Lance. It's been great stuff, and I'm sure that people will learn a lot and wanting to follow your progress as you continue on your journey.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great advice from Lance that I think you can put into action whenever you're trying to change an organization, regardless of the size of the change or of the organization. Know the problem you're trying to solve and then stand your ground. Drive credibility and trust in what you're trying to accomplish. It sounds simple, but living it can be extremely challenging. And the first step to putting it into action is to do something with this information. I'd like to invite you to share your thoughts in one of two ways. First, you can join the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag TransformIT. Share with us any key takeaways, memorable quotes, or ideas you got from today's episode. In addition, join in the conversation here on the episode page. Share your own experiences about driving change in a large organization, the challenges you've encountered, or just ask a question about what you've heard. Also, make sure that you check out the resources that both Intel and we at the IT Transformation Institute have made available for you. You can check them out at www.intel.com/IT-center and on our website at www.transformingit.org. That's it for today's episode of the Transform IT Show. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thanks for joining us. I'm Charles Araujo, and together we can change the world of IT.